Welcome to the Corporate Hangover. I'm your host, Tiffany Kennedy, and today we are speaking with Mr. Jeremy Duffy. Jeremy has spent his career helping people navigate security, both online and as part of leadership training. As an NSA educator, he has trained federal agencies in operations security and leadership development. This has earned him recognition for his advocacy in battling workplace toxicity. And after 16 years, he left the agency to share his insights with the public. And now he's working on his book called Are You Listening?, which is a deep dive into the consequences of treating employees as adversaries instead of allies. Jeremy, I'm looking forward to this conversation and welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it.
So why don't you give us a quick rundown of your career and how you ended up working at the NSA?
Well, it was pretty straightforward, really. There was a scholarship program that might still be around called the Scholarship for Service, where they fund you for 2 years of higher education if you go work for the federal government for 2 years. It's a pretty decent deal, all things considered. And it only goes for certain skill fields, so be aware of that. And honestly, I haven't looked into it for a while. I don't even know if it's still happening. But at the time, it was operated and funded largely by the NSA to, as I was told, bring more modern tech skill into the government and into the agency to bring fresh ideas and so on. And so they hired me and there we go. And as far as the rest of your question, what was the career like? Well, I struggled with bureaucracy, inefficiency, and stagnation for 16 years, and it is not my jam. I don't enjoy not accomplishing anything or doing anything of value, which is why I spent a lot of my extra time working in the National Cryptologic School teaching briefing skills and learning how to do PowerPoint and learning how to do websites and share information online as much as I was able to, and try to take the kinds of skills that I learned while I was at the NSA and bring them to normal people who can then use them to protect themselves from invasive government, corporations, and people.
Nice. And so going back to just, I don't think inefficiency is anyone's jam. And so I can definitely agree with you there. At what point did it really start affecting your engagement while you were in your role? Was it something that you just kind of, was it like a slow realization, or did a specific event just kind of change your perspective?
Well, one of the toughest things about working for the NSA is that if you come in with high expectations, and I did, I'll be honest with you, I was really starry-eyed at the time, thinking, man, I'm an NSA person, I'm super special, and I wonder if I get pulled over, if they see the badge, they'll let me go. But what I found was basically just sitting around doing nothing, fighting bureaucracy, and there's no accomplishment. And the entire culture is based on the appearance of action, the appearance of doing something useful. So what happens is you have managers who fiercely defend the illusion that you're doing something that matters. And when you're like me and you're like, can we maybe do something else? They don't react well. So it was very despairing. It was very, very difficult to work in that environment. And people told me constantly not to rock the boat because there were consequences for that. And I'll be honest, I didn't really believe them. But after 16 years, I have to say, yeah, they were right. There's no way to have a career in at least that federal agency if you're outspoken and trying to push for positive change.
That's fair, Jeremy. And one of the things that you kind of mentioned is that employees are sometimes treated as adversaries instead of allies. When you say that employees are treated as adversaries instead of allies, what does that look like in practice?
Well, lots of things. I mean, it's assumed that the employees are lazy, stupid, or in it for themselves. So they don't really include the employees on decisions. They don't talk to them. They don't lean on them as a resource, as a stakeholder for things. And they tend to implement things by ambush. This new policy, this new change. They never ask the workforce, but they ramrod it down our throats without our permission, without our consent, without our say so, and expect us to do it with a smile.
Yeah, got
So
it.
you're familiar with offices that are doing return to office right now. It's a similar concept. No point have I ever heard of a company who actually had a return to office policy that was based on a business need. Near as I can tell, it was entirely executive vanity. They just want to see people in the office because it makes them feel like they have something to do, I don't know. But the idea is that they say it with a smile and then they will tell you that, oh, everyone can't wait to get back in the office. That everyone is no one. I have never talked to anybody who was working remote who wanted to go back to the office. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I've just never run across one.
Yeah, and one thing I've noticed there, just to piggyback off of it, is for those workers, this is a great example for those employees or workers that did work from home. This might be anecdotal, but it seemed like most people were willing to work even a bit more just because they had the benefit of being at home or with their families. And I think you've seen where people are using a lot more discretion with how much effort they're even putting into the work when they're on site. Or even I know of some people that used to maybe just work into all hours of the night just because, you could throw on Netflix or something while you're at home and just kind of let the time go by, that have now really committed to making that distinction of, okay, fine, I have to be back in the office, but whatever I do in the office, that's what you're going to get for the day. And being very, very judicious about how they're giving employers their time now. That's a really good thing to think about. And I think when you go back to just that whole adversary versus allies piece, if you treat employees like they're your adversaries, eventually they're probably going to treat you the same way, or they're going to treat the
Oh,
employer the same way. And
absolutely.
so that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, you know, the us versus them divide that you
Yeah.
constantly see between executives and the masses, that's built by executives.
You want to share a little bit more on that thought? I'd love to hear more.
Well, sure. I mean, take, for example, your standard town hall meeting where the executives are sharing some new great program that they've come up with or whatever. And people are freaked out. They don't
Hmm.
like it. Either the return to office or we had this silly rotation policy at the NSA where you couldn't stay at non-headquarters for more than a couple of years before they make you come back for some reason. Just stupid things like that. And employees will say, hold up, this is a problem. What about this? And the exec will say, oh, well, this. Thank you. Next question. They didn't answer the question, or it wasn't a sufficient question, or it was just wrong. But there's no follow up because they're not looking for that. If they are authentic, and I want to be clear, I have met some extremely authentic and great leaders who still didn't understand that what they're doing doesn't count as listening. It's just talking. A town hall is just talking. It's not a listening event.
Right on. And so, what would you say, because you've also worked with training leaders as well, what are some of the biggest roadblocks that you see with getting leadership to actually listen to what their employees are saying or asking for?
Well, honestly, it's this adversarial thing because one, they think they are listening because they're holding these town halls, they're doing surveys, they're doing, coffee with the commander was one of the things that we did. And they just couldn't believe me when I told them this isn't going to work. You have people who are terrified to speak up because of retaliation. They say, well, we don't allow that. Okay, those are words. Now, what are the actions behind that? Because what people are experiencing is retaliation and not necessarily from you, but the people between you. You don't really have a good handle on that middle management and what happens there. And because of that, people don't trust you or they can't find a path to get to you. So they're trying their authentic best, or they're just saying the words because they know it's the new normal and they don't really believe it. So they'll make a show of it, but without any actual heart behind it. Yeah, okay. So we'll have a town hall, we'll have a forum or whatever. One example I can think of was leadership sent out a survey to the workforce, and the results were really, really bad on this particular initiative. So they canceled the survey and sent out their bios to everybody, concluding that, well, people just didn't know them well enough.
Oh, wow. That's not where I thought you were going to go from there.
No, they decided, you must not know me. Look, the amount of times that I heard assume good intent was exhausting because we didn't care what your intent was. We only cared if you were competent, and they did not express that. Every time the executives are disconnected and distant and then respond in the most wild, wacky way that has nothing to do with actually solving real problems, what are we supposed to think except they don't have the competence to solve those problems?
Yeah. That just really sounds like the recipe kind of for a toxic work environment as well.
Oh, yes.
And so, in addition to listening, What is some advice that you would give leaders that may be listening or may listen to this episode one day that they can do to start shifting the experience of those under their command or those on their teams or even in their organization?
Well, you have to create space, and that includes people who are afraid to speak up, especially if you're already in a toxic environment. You have to have an anonymous means of submitting issues, concerns, and questions. And people need to see that that works and that it's not a black hole. So once you have, say, an anonymous web form or whatever that people can truly believe can't be tied back to them, unless you're making bomb threats or whatever, have maybe a trusted intermediary or I don't know, but ask your workforce what's going to work. But once you have that in place, you have to show that it had an impact. So I always recommended that they put out a list or a website that showed, here are the things that I was asked. Here's what I think about that. What do you think? And then open it for questions, open it for responses, have back and forth, a forum essentially. And in my opinion, if the vast majority of the people are telling you this is a bad idea, then you should not go forward with it as a leader. Or if you do, you need to take the responsibility to say, look, I see all these objections. I do think this is going to work. Let's move forward and then check in at X reasonable time. And if that's not working, we will reevaluate. But then you have to follow through.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the most important thing. It has to have follow through. But
I 100% agree with you.
process should be collaborative with the stakeholders. And the biggest thing is execs need to understand that the employees are stakeholders in a lot more than they think.
You're one of the few people that I've ever heard say that employees are stakeholders, and they actually are. They truly are. And as someone who just listened to your suggestion about having that forum, it's just really a way to create transparency between leadership and their teams and their organization. I can think of several leaders that might be cringing even at the thought of having to engage in such a transparent act. What do you think is the thing that creates that hesitancy or gives leaders pause with wanting to create that transparent of an environment? There's got to be something or some reason. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, let me tell you a story. Early in my marriage, many, many years ago, I was having an argument with my wife, and I don't even remember what it was about. And the one thing I absolutely did not want to do was apologize or back down because I was pissed and I was prideful. The thing is, logically, I knew I needed to settle things down a bit. So I was just searching in my mind for how am I going to proceed from here? And I realized I couldn't apologize I wouldn't say I was wrong. That's rude. You don't tell people, oh, I'm sorry I was wrong when you don't really believe it. That's a lie. But I did raise my voice and I regretted that and I apologized for it. And it calmed things down so fast that we were able to actually have a decent conversation. And both of us realized, this really isn't that important. And it was not worth where we were going with this. But the thing is that defined a before and after period for me in my life where I stopped being so vain about saying I was wrong about something. I realized, you know what? It's not a big deal to be wrong. In fact, if you embrace that, you're going to get along so much better in life. I will tell people all the time, look, I might be wrong, but I think this. And then if somebody says, yeah, you're wrong, here's the thing, I say, whoops, my mistake. I'll be more careful. And it's not this giant production. But if people are so incredibly bent on not appearing weak or wrong, if they have this fantastical view that the leader's supposed to know everything or never be at fault, of course they're not going to bid. But they're going to protect that false image, which is ironically going to make them look even more foolish and less trustworthy. So it's basically, I guess, a natural response, but a very unproductive one.
Going back to what you'd mentioned, building upon that transparency and finding ways to actually engage workers, even if you're not in a position of power, right? You don't necessarily have to be, quote unquote, the leader or the executive, but there's a lot of things that we can do to start shifting that experience. And that really just highlights that there's a lot of work to be done and we still have a long ways to go.
Yeah, it also comes from a core confusion about what a leader is. Leader is frequently used synonymously with manager, executive, or somebody who's in charge, but that's not what the word means. The word refers to somebody who is followed, who blazes the trail, who clears the path. And that could be anybody. That could just be a coworker. It could be a team lead. It could just be anybody you respect. And they've somewhat co-opted and stolen the word leader and applied it to themselves like with a brush, when in reality, leader is a title you can only earn from below. It's not because you have your name on a door.
Yeah, 100%. And I love that you said that. You're also writing a book, and I just kind of want to get into that as much as we can. It's not a small feat, right? And so, what has, not at all, what has writing Are You Listening taught you about leadership and accountability?
Well, the book itself is a summation of the things I learned about leadership and accountability. Most of what I learned from writing the book is it's hard to do it on your own. I would happily have sought an editor and test readers and feedback, but I literally can't. I'm legally bound to submit every draft to the NSA for review before I can send it to anybody. That's called the pre-publication requirement. It's a lifetime obligation for working there. And every time I did that, it involved upwards of 6 months before I got the draft back. And then I would get the feedback and I would have to fight them. They're trying to block me from releasing this information. I tell them that's not protected information. You're not allowed to block that, that kind of thing. After that much time letting it rest, I realized, I could probably word this better and I'll do it again. And then I have to submit it again. And then here's another 6-month delay. So it was a very challenging process, but for the most part, my entire time at the agency was spent teaching, learning, and organizing my thoughts about why are things so bad? What is going on here? And I basically boiled it all down to this listening problem because there are so many problems that were created, most problems, I would say, because the people in charge didn't listen to the people who knew. I mean, that's really what it boiled down to. And I actually have a really good example of that in reverse. I was the first technical person to join the OPSEC team, and the OPSEC team had a public website where corporations who had government contracts and military could order posters and other training materials to help teach military people not to take selfies that are geotagged in front of the weapons depot for our enemies to target, that kind of thing. And that website was under contract for $300,000 a year. And given the background that I have, I was able to tell them this is an incredible ripoff. What we're doing here shouldn't cost even a fraction of that. And I was able to help lead a project to replace it that literally saved the agency millions of dollars because my manager trusted and respected my technical expertise. That's all it took. That is all it took. They cleared the way for me to do great things for them. And that is how it works in a job when you have people who know what they're doing, especially if you have one of those rock star employees. And you can always tell when you have a rock star employee because you see their name everywhere and it's always something cool.
Yeah, and it just really comes down to giving your team the agency with which to work, right? So, as I've always understood leadership, it's you're removing blockers for your team. You're helping them to be able to move forward.
Servant
And
leadership.
yeah, exactly that. And oftentimes, just going back to your point earlier, is that even people that end up with a leadership title or a leadership role, they don't understand that very often. And most times, as I've seen, it's because they might come from a generation where they also had bad leadership as examples of what not to do, right? And so I think we're starting to see some change with millennial and Gen X leaders trying to kind of pivot away from bad standards of leadership that have been set by our predecessors. But it's such a large ship to turn around and get everyone moving in the right direction. So when you do have leaders that actually block and tackle for you and act as servant leaders, it makes a world of difference in how you're then able to execute and to drive and deliver on the things that you're being asked of. At the end of the day, going back to your other point of being a rock star, no one needs to be micromanaged in order to get things done. But so often you find that that's exactly what takes place. So rather than being able to work at your highest level or deliver on the things that you know that you can, You're often wasting time just giving someone a status report and making sure that they're consistently informed and all this other nonsense that takes away from your ability to just deliver.
100%. And I would say, strangely, micromanagement is something that some people want
Really?
because it helps them focus. For example, I do not like micromanagement, but I also give a lot of status updates and ask for a lot of feedback from my coworkers and my managers because I want to get it right. But that's a consent thing. That's the difference. A good leader is asking the employees, okay, how much do you want to touch base? How much help do you need? What can I do for you? How can I help? That's what it's all about. And you let people work to their own style, which was another mistake that leaders made constantly because, again, they didn't listen. They assumed. I had generals who were claiming how important it was to pull somebody up on stage and clap for them and make them the center of attention while I worked with people on various spectrums who would be in panic attacks for days if they knew that was going to happen. And all I could think was, how stupid do you have to be an Air Force, colonel or whatever, and still not understand that different people want recognition in different ways?
Yep, exactly that.
But working is the same. I mentioned return to office earlier. And to be fair, there literally are people who want to work in the office. It helps them focus, it helps them separate. Maybe their house is too loud, too many people. Who knows? All kinds of reasons. But that should be a choice. Forcing people into the office when you can't even define what the business purpose for that is essentially driving the us versus them wedge because you lose respect. You're asking me to do a thing, but you're not telling me why. And you owe that to me. We're both adults. I'm a working professional. You need to explain to me why I'm doing a thing. And if you can't, that's a failure of leadership.
Exactly that. And then going back to your point, everyone works differently as well. My most productive self might not be in an office. It might just be in the most quiet space possible. So then my thoughts can't be interrupted and you don't have a myriad of people coming up to your cubicle. Same way, someone, to your point, might not be able to work at home, and recognizing and understanding and allowing people to be transparent with you regarding what they need, going back to that transparency piece, is very important, right? It's critically important.
Critically. For example, in the NSA, we had a lot of people on various spectrums that made them very antisocial, but also brilliant, sort of like a Rain Man kind of thing. So people who did linguistics and programming, and I mean, we're talking nation state hackers. All right, and linguists and mathematicians and cryptologists, people who need deep focus. I mean, they're unlocking the secrets of the universe in their mind, and they cannot deal with the audio, visual, and smell distraction that is happening all around them in, say, an open plan office, which they implemented at the NSA over everyone's objections because it will help them, and I'm going to air quote very sarcastically, collaborate. And it was just the dumbest thing. And obviously, it was going to be a bad thing. And it was. But they would measure it because if they measured it, they would see they were wrong. And if they saw they were wrong, that would hurt their pride. It would hurt their chances for promotion, that sort of thing.
Yeah, seems like there's always a lot of ego involved.
Ego, that was the word I was looking for.
Yeah, always a lot of ego. Leading with ego instead of leading to or seeking to understand is
Correct.
definitely a hallmark.
If you're leading for yourself, you're not a leader, but kind of
Right.
by definition.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. You mentioned that you specialize in tech safety, and I'm kind of curious, where's one place that the average person should start if they want to stop exposing themselves to online risks?
Well, really, it's all about finding a great resource. And there are some organizations out there like the Electronic Freedom Foundation, the EFF, they're called. The ACLU is a good resource, although they don't focus entirely on the technical. And of course, my blog, which I don't update as much as I'd like to, but I try to make everything there as useful as possible. For example, the most recent article set that I created is called Life Security. And I'm trying to teach people how to not overexpose themselves online because if you accidentally draw bad attention, you don't want to be an easy target. You don't want to make it so easy for them to come after you. Or say you're a Muslim girl who does not really follow the traditions, but your parents catch you because you're on a TikTok and they found out about it. That's a real example I'm using, by the way. It's kind of paraphrased, but it didn't go well for her. And that's true for lots of people. If you're away at college with your super conservative parents and you've got a pride flag on the wall behind you and you weren't thinking, crap, what's in the background? What can they see when I'm doing a Zoom call? You're bringing down the thunder and that's not good. Or if I really wanted to come after you, the ways that I could do it are limited essentially only by two things: imagination and information. And information provides options. For example, if I knew you personally and I wanted to frame you for something or ruin your life or whatever, and I needed access to your phone, well, do you have fingerprint unlock on your phone?
Yeah,
Yeah. So have you posted your fingerprints on the internet before?
I would hope not.
Yeah, except how many times do people point their phone at their hand to take a picture of something? Here's a pretty flower. Here's a bug. Here's a cool rock I found.
Ah,
That's a 40 megapixel camera. I can zoom right in on your fingerprints. Perfect clarity photo. People do it all the time and they don't
oh,
even
wow.
realize it. And I can replicate fingerprints with a 3D printer. There's been experiments where people did it with just melting down some gummy bear candies, that sort of thing. So
Oh,
I can
wow.
make a working fake fingerprint of yours using only a photo that you uploaded yourself to the internet.
My mind is blown. So then that many of us think that we're doing a great job of protecting ourselves, but what's one habit that maybe you see people consistently do thinking that it's protecting them, but it actually isn't?
Honestly, the only thing that really comes to mind is it's not exactly an answer to your question. I'll keep thinking, but a lot of people just throw up their hands and give up and say, well, I'm not doing anything important. I'm not anybody important. Therefore, I don't have to be secure. And the problem is, it's not true. It's kind of like back in the 90s, hackers went after big targets, but now hackers go after everyone because it's economies of scale. They can write a program that will attack hundreds of thousands of people. So if they only get two or 300, they're still rich. So it doesn't really matter. And like the identity theft thing, well, my identity isn't worth stealing. You can always go into more debt, my friend.
Fair. Wouldn't
So
want to, but fair.
if they get 50 to $100 and you're saddled with thousands of dollars, they don't care. So being careless, it's not worth it. But you can't be an expert either. And that has been my driving philosophy forever. You shouldn't have to be an expert to be safe. So I try to break this down into the smallest, simplest moves you can make to protect yourself, which a lot of it comes down to awareness. You probably won't forget the fingerprint thing.
Oh, not at all. I'm still shaking.
Well, there's more. The fact that I can copy any key I can see in a photo.
Oh, wow.
If I can clearly see the ridges, I can copy it. I can go down to the locksmith, get a copy of it made, and walk into your house. The reflections, you don't even know how many times people have posted themselves nude or semi-nude online when they were trying to sell a teapot or a piece of furniture that had a glass front. Happens all the time. Or, like I said, what's in the background. And the thing is, all of these risks depend on the photo being very large quality. So if you reduce the size of the photo to where it's just the minimum quality necessary to be seen clearly on the screen, it gets rid of a lot of those problems. So reduce the photo quality and do a little spot check. That's really it. It's just those two steps, right? Like the girl who said, oh, we're engaged. And there was a clear positive pregnancy test still in the frame. So people focused on, well, we know why you're getting engaged. Not super good for her, kind of embarrassing, that kind of thing. Or the college kids who are like, hi, mom, hi, dad, giant dildo on and they're like,
Oh, gosh.
but that kind of thing. It's just simple philosophy things. That's what life tech is all about. It's a mentality, something that you can adopt internally to help you be safer all the time. For example, always be stingy with your information, like a dog with a chew toy. Don't like, right? Oh, what's your last name? Where do you live? What's your birthday? I mean, why would you answer these kinds of questions? But people do it all the time because they're at the dentist's office or something. And they ask you, what's your social security number? And you would say, well, it's this. And I would say, why? Why do you need that information? Because the more places your information is, the more opportunities it is to get lost or stolen.
That's true.
So it's important to not give even little bits of information to people who do not need it because data breaches are constant. They happen everywhere. And by the way, I called my insurance ahead of time and they do not require a social security number for payment. So anyone who asks it for me, I can tell them to pound sand.
My mind is just blown, Jeremy. Mind is just blown. And for a while back, there used to be on social media, there'd be these posts that would just like it'd be like a list of questions and it'd be like, guess how well you know me or something like that. And you'd see so many people just responding in the comments with all these bits of information that someone somewhere could probably put together and
Or
maybe guess a password or something like that. And
or
people
if
are
I was
actively
pissed off,
engaging in it.
let's say I'm pissed off at somebody on Reddit, they just annoyed me. And I found out that they frequent, these particular subreddits. One of them is an anime subreddit. And I post to that subreddit a quiz that says it has a picture of a bunch of characters from anime and it has names, it has numbers and it has months on it. And I said, the month of your birthday is the first character. The day of your birthday is the second character. They fight, who wins? Anybody who answers, I have their birthday. I don't have the year, but I can get that from a different post. And I start putting the pieces together. This would be a really sneaky, but fairly effective way to target somebody if you wanted to start building the information that you need to get creative with them. And I know that sounds a little movie plot, but I can give you a real example, something that I've done myself. So I was at a conference somewhere, and I don't know why this happens, but every time I'm not at home and I'm traveling, something goes down. And so my wife calls me kind of in a panic. She has a friend who is constantly getting harassed on her Facebook page by somebody who clearly hates her guts. And she's fairly sure that it was the ex-wife of this friend was married and now they have somebody else. So she's the ex-wife, I'm sorry. And basically the new wife is really pissed at her. So she called my wife. My wife called me, said, can you do anything about it? Facebook won't give up the IP address, so she can't go to the police. I said, yes, I can. Here's what we do. I have a website. My website, you can leave comments. People who leave comments, it records the IP address. All we need to do is get her to comment on my page. So I created an article that says, hey, I'm thinking about working with this person. And I point to their Facebook and I said, but I don't really know a lot about them. If you do, could you let me know if they're reputable and a decent person? And then I told my wife's friend, go on your Facebook page and write a similar post that says, hey, I'm trying to build a business relationship with this guy, points to my website, to that article. Could you put in a good word for me? Didn't take but 20 minutes, and I got a comment that sounded exactly like the ones that were being left on her page, but an IP address.
Oh, wow.
It was really that easy, and that's called social engineering.
Wow, Jeremy.
A little convoluted, but you can learn to be quite evil in this way. And it is unfortunate that you have to teach people to be evil to teach them to be safe. But the thing is, most people don't have the energy for evil.
Yeah.
They just want to be
Well,
safe.
yeah. And thankfully so.
Thankfully, yes.
I'm going to follow up with two questions. So there's been a recent amount of chit chat, for lack of a better term, about how well social media apps are protecting our data and should you be using different apps just because of the risk. I personally see, my personal thought is that any of these apps that you use are doing something that they probably shouldn't be doing with your data. But what are your thoughts on social media apps and whether or not there's anyone that's inherently or intrinsically safe to use or better to use than the other?
There are apps that are specifically designed for privacy, and don't take their word for it. Look to the security nets, the subreddits, wikis, blogs, all the people who are really tinfoil hat leaning. I wouldn't go real tinfoil hat because conspiracy theorists are not somebody I would take advice from. People who are concerned but smart concerned, and see what they're recommending. And right now, Signal is the thing I've been hearing a lot about. It's the one that the reporters are using, the free press like ProPublica, who are out there exposing SCOTUS corruption and other things. They're putting themselves on the line and they're protecting their sources. So that's a strong endorsement. And so I would follow that advice essentially. There's encryption tools you can use that everyone agrees is the best to use and that kind of thing. I mean, I'm not about everything. I'm still not big on password managers personally because they get in the way of life too much. I know they're more secure, but they're also inconvenient for how I use computers anyway. But to answer your original question, LifeSec tip number 4, always assume information you share will be lost, sold, or collected somewhere, and that nobody is safe with your information, and especially not stuff that's foreign owned. So when people talk about TikTok, they're not wrong. I'm not going to say we should just cold turkey shut that thing off. There are people who make their living through TikTok, but doing something about that foreign ownership is not wrong because They are collecting and amassing dossiers on every user. And that's not a China sucks thing. That's literally everyone. All of the American companies are doing it too. And right now, there are not enough protection laws in place. There's not enough oversight. There's not enough accountability. The only thing you can do is resist as much as possible. For example, maybe don't put your Amazon Echo in the same room as where you're having sensitive conversations. I mean, I have an Amazon Echo, but I'm aware that it does record and there is no control over what they hear and what they do with that information.
Wow, that's scary.
It is, and it's unacceptable to me, but I am also not in charge. So, short term, the key is to just make sure people are aware that with enough information, I can paint you however I want, true or not.
That's true. When you think about privacy and security, what are some ways that maybe companies fail their employees when it comes to protecting their information? Oh gosh, I think I stumbled into a wormhole here.
Well, for one, they collect it, and data that is collected can be abused. The amount of times the companies have data breaches, it's unreal. It used to be news. Now no one cares because it happens every day, which is incredibly sad to say, like school shootings. I mean, the first one or two school shootings were national news, and now it could be happening today and you won't even hear about it. And that's disgusting. The point is, we've become so powerless to the abuse, and there's no stopping it unless we put strong laws and accountability into place, whistleblower protections, and so on. But some of the ways that companies have failed, besides collecting it, which puts it at risk, not protecting it properly, like the Office of Personnel Management had an enormous data breach in 2015, if I recall correctly, because they hadn't implemented any of the security controls that people who worked there and who investigated them had been telling them they needed for years. So straight up incompetence, that's one. One of my favorite examples from way back, the State Department used to publish an employee roster on the internet
Oh wow,
with names, locations, and phone numbers and departments.
that's insane.
Yeah, it was pretty funny. So basically just being careless with your information from the collection to the handling to everything else. For example, they'll sell your information to data brokers for extra money
Wow, I am speechless here.
and also abuse it. Like Facebook has been known to use information from your profile for targeted advertising, which sometimes causes unpleasant results, like lady who's getting ready for a wedding that she starts seeing weight loss ads and stuff shaming her not being able to fit into the dress, that kind of thing. Or somebody who just did some searches online for baby stuff and started getting magazines and free formula samples and stuff in the mail. And the husband's like, there's something you want to tell me?
Yeah, and I do believe that because I can be talking about something one day with my spouse, and then if I go on social media, I will see those. It's almost like within the next 24 hours, I'll see something that just was part of my conversation
Just to
the the,
just to
the day prior.
skirt away from the conspiracy side of things, there is a little bit of, and I forget the term, where once you start paying attention to the thing, you start seeing it more. Like one time I became aware, is that a Cybertruck? That is weird. And then suddenly they were everywhere. They were there before. I just wasn't paying attention to them. However, what you said is also a thing. There are techniques used for websites to monitor where you go online so that they can get more data about you to advertise to you in more air quote effective ways, which I would just call manipulation. I mean, it's dirty and it's hard to control, which is, by the way, why I recommend you use two different browsers. For example, Firefox and Brave. You use Brave to browse the internet. You use Firefox for anything you log into, like your email, your bank, and Facebook, because a lot of those technologies depend on you being logged in one tab and browsing in another of the same window, because there's some information sharing that's allowed within the same browser between tabs.
Jeremy, let me tell you something. You've sent me down what's going to be a week-long rabbit hole for this, and I'm intrigued, and I feel like I just need and have to know more.
Well, you can check out my website for a lot of the tips that I was telling you, like good one based on another LifeSec tip, generalize as much as possible. You notice I never named my wife while we were talking because one, it's not necessary, and two, it creates risk. A good example of that principle is you have GPS, I am assuming, in your phone. And sometimes you want to go places and sometimes you want to go home. So did you set your home location?
No, I haven't, but I'll tell you this. It has estimated where my home is, and I'm not sure if it's because this is where I spend the most time, but it has now started suggesting to me if I want to go home based on my address.
Well, my recommendation is to go ahead and set your home address, but set it to someplace in your neighborhood or town because that's close enough. You can get home from there, but there's no point in putting a target directly on your home because then if somebody gets into your phone, they get your phone or they share that data, all of these ways your home address is now leaked. And it's just as simple to set it to the neighbor's house, so down the street, the guy you hate, whatever. I mean, because it does the same thing, but without giving away information. If a website asks you for your birthday, what are they actually looking for? Do they need your birthday? Or are they just trying to figure out you're old enough to see this news article? In that case, they just need a birthday. Why give them the real one?
Yeah, that's fair. So, Jeremy, I don't know that you actually mentioned it directly, but what is your site so that people can stay up to date on your book and to find more insight and tips?
It is thegeekprofessor.com.
Excellent. And I'll make sure that we have that linked in the show notes so that anyone who's interested and wants to stay up to date, they can find all of Jeremy's work and, most importantly, get updates on Are You Listening?
Correct.
So, Jeremy, I know we're nearly at time here. Just looking back to where you started with your career and to where you are now, what is one thing that you would want to just leave with anyone who's listening? And it can be about leadership, it can be about organizational change and how we can better shift that. But I'm just going to give you the floor to kind of speak to that.
I would say, don't settle. I think a lot of people get into a job and decide, well, this is as good as it's going to get. And I don't believe that. A job can just be a temporary place while you're looking for something better. So many of the people I worked with at the NSA essentially gave up hope and they just get stuck there. Whereas I was always looking for a way out, always watching to see, okay, where is my off ramp? Where is the time that I can get out of here and go do something else? Because this is not what I want to do forever. And I think there's a certain level of fatalism that people settle into. It's fine to work a job you hate for a little while, but don't rest there. Keep your eyes outside on your next move. Make your next best move. I mean, life is like chess. Wherever you are, you got to make your next best move.
I love that. Well, Jeremy, this has been an insightful conversation. I feel like I've learned quite a bit, and I'm going to be learning quite a bit more. And I can't thank you enough for just coming onto the show and speaking with me today.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.